smack in the middle. We call ourselves the heart of Manhattan, right? We go from 14th Street up to 57th Street, and right the middle swath. There's a little bit of cutout. We go to 6th Avenue on the east side. It's a little bit more jagged. So I think we can start now. It's 6:01, but we've hit quorum. So I'm just going to begin. My name is Renee Kinsella. I'm the chair of the Budget, Education, and City Services Committee of CB5. That's BEX for short. Julie Chu is the co-chair of the committee. Thank you all for attending tonight. We have 3 items on the agenda. First, we're going to hear from Jonathan Rosenberg and Michael Jacobs of the Independent Budget Office regarding budget options for New York City. You all know I've sent a bunch of stuff around that the IBO provides nonpartisan information about the city budget and tax revenues and publishes 3 annual reports as required by the city charter. Our second item is an action item. It's based upon discussion of Intro 980, and then that's measures to improve air quality in New York City. We have Nick, and I'm going to murder this, Witzkowski of Councilmember Constantina's. I knew I would do this. Constantinidis office. I know that I pronounced that incorrectly as well, and I apologize. And then finally, we're going to have Michelle Stein, who is the manager of volunteer experiences at Streetwise, and that's a work development mentoring program, and that helps over 300 people who are unemployed and underemployed in New York to help increase their professional skills and gain the social capital they need. So just a brief overview of how the committee works. I'm going to introduce the presenters, and they're going to have the opportunity to present what they're here to speak about. And after their presentation is concluded, the committee is going to be permitted to ask questions of the presenters. And then when all of the BEX committee questions have been answered, then members of the public who are on will be permitted to ask questions. Please use the raise hand function if you'd like to speak. That's the way that we do it on Zoom and not in the chat. Once everyone's questions have been addressed, the committee will go into business session, and this is when only the members of the BEX committee discuss the issue amongst themselves, and they determine what action to take. And if there is an action item on the agenda, or we decide to draft a resolution, it gets voted upon by this committee. And then should the resolution pass, it's going to be presented to the full board on March 11th. That's our full board meeting for a vote. And that vote is the final position of CB5. So the first presentation tonight is of real import and interest to us, obviously, given our committee and given its remit on budget issues. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to the Independent Budget Office, Jonathan and Michael.
Thank you. Am I going to be able to share my screen here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry about that. So do you see that? Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for inviting us tonight to speak to you. Obviously, my name is Jonathan Rosenberg. I'm Director of Budget Review. Michael, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself when you're a part of it right now.
Michael Jacobs. I'm the supervisor of the economics unit at IBO.
Okay, so I put together kind of a quick PowerPoint that I've used in a couple different instances. So some of it may or may not be of interest. As you see, even the date is not the correct date, but anyway, so I'll try to get through this pretty quick, and then if you have time for some questions as well. So oh, no, okay. What's going on? Oh, no. This is not the version I wanted. I just went through and did a whole thing here, and this is not. Oh, darn.
All right. If you want, you can stop sharing your screen while you find it.
Wrong version. Sorry. I should have checked it before I. Anyway, so I'll start by trying to talk through it, and then maybe I can get it back on the screen here, so as not to waste a lot of time.
Would it be useful? Do you want me to switch to the second item first? Would that be useful?
Maybe if that might be work for you. I don't know how long that's going to take, but yeah, I sent myself the thing, and it seems to have sent me the wrong one. So
that's all right. That's all right. We'll just flip. What we'll do now.
Sorry about that.
No. We will. We'll go to our second item, which Tristan and Rachel, they've been researching it for a while. And this is measures to improve air quality. It's something that we at CB5 is on record as asking for in our budget requests. And so there's a recent bill, or I guess rather 3 bills that address the issue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to Tristan and also to Nick to sort of explain and answer all the questions. So Tristan, do you want to start?
Sure. Yep. 1 second. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? I'm sorry.
No.
No.
Do you want me to try and send the deck to Luke to do it?
Yeah, that would be great if you could do that.
No.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, I'm going to do that right now. Let me just see.
Okay, Google, turn on the dining room.
Okay, turning the dining room on. Sorry, it looks like the map isn't available.
Okay, Luke, do you have it?
I will confirm momentarily.
Sorry to put you on the hot seat here.
Coming through the Ethernets.
Of course, now I figured mine out too. So I
Okay, I got it. Just a second.
Shall we switch back? Shall we?
Sure, go ahead. Go for
Hokey
it.
pokey. Let's
Sorry
go.
about that.
Jonathan, why don't you
Okay.
try? And then, yeah, okay.
All right, we'll go back to me now. Sure.
Yes.
All right. Hopefully this one is the right one, even though I thought it was the right one before. All right. So here we go. Beginning. Okay. So yeah, here we are. So IBO was created as part of the New York City Charter revision of November 1989 that was adopted in November of 1989. And as stated in there in Chapter 11 was the section that created the IBO, and in it, paraphrasing Section 260, it said that IBO was created to provide controller of the city council, the borough presidents, and the community boards, of course, information to assist those officials and bodies in the discharge of the responsibilities related to the budget process. Now, Michael can tell you, because he was actually here for the creation, the IBO didn't get created actually until for 6 years after. It didn't actually get funded by a succession of administrations. Mainly the Giuliani administration was not interested in funding the IBO as per the charter, but in February 1996, they began work. And as you already said, Renee, one of the things we are a nonpartisan. We provide nonpartisan analysis of the city's budget and economy. We publish 3 annual reports regarding the city's financial plans. We forecast revenues and expenditures and go over the economic conditions. We also issue fiscal briefs and reports on a variety of issues. We provide access to information related to the city's finances, and we also are a resource for answering budgetary questions. I know Joe reached out to me originally with some questions, and we are always open for questions. For even though it states that we're primarily there to serve elected officials and community boards, we're also there for the general public as well. I just wanted to quickly just go over before we move into what the budget is. I'm sure most of you have seen this, but for those of you who haven't, this is the financial plan summary. This was released in January of 2021 by the de Blasio administration, and as it shows, the budget for fiscal 21 as required is balanced. It's a $95 billion budget. in the current year. And the plan for that, we're supposed to show a 5-year plan as the city, as you're probably aware. And so next year, they also have to show at the preliminary budget's release a balanced budget for next year. And as you see there, the budget for next year is $92.3 billion as presented in the financial plan. Now, and there, as you can see at the bottom, there's no gap in the current fiscal year, but there are gaps in the out years ranging from $4.2 to $4.3 billion. I'm not going to go into all the specifics because, you know, I don't think that was really the topic today about the specifics and the little intricacies of the plan, of the financial plan. And I'm sure most of you are already aware of some of them as well. But just to say, this is obviously what the position is of the administration. And, you know, New York obviously being one of the largest city budgets, the largest city budget in the country, and the 5th largest, or I believe 5th or 6th now, I'm not sure which number, largest budget overall in the country. There's obviously the US budget, there's California, Texas, New York, and I believe New York City is right, is the 5th. And just kind of a sense, I know this is a chart that's kind of has a lot of information on it, but just presenting that where our revenues come from. If I actually go back, as you see, we have on the top line, it's the city funds revenues. So approximately in the current year, $66 billion of the $95 billion is city funds, 67 going up to 73 in 2025. The majority of that is, of course, taxes. And taxes, unlike with a lot of municipalities around the state, New York City has a lot of different tax revenue options, and real property being by far the largest, making up about half of all New York City tax collections. These are IBO's estimates for tax revenue. One little tidbit you'll notice, real property taxes are going down next year, IBO and the administration as well. And Michael's staff, he can talk to this as well, but it's one of the first years that we're projecting a decrease in real property collections since, what was it, 2098?
98, I think, yeah.
98. So it's just a little tidbit there. Obviously, most of the other taxes are going up, we're projecting, which makes up for some of the loss in real property taxes, and we won't go into specifics of what's going on with that, but mainly resulting from some changes in the role from the Department of Finance. But anyway, so as you can see, half of our revenue comes from, in tax revenue at least, comes from real property, and that's really the only tax that the city itself has any real direct power over. All the other taxes and lots of the fines and fees have to be authorized in Albany as well. And so here's just a summary of the other places where city tax revenue comes from. 21 is a little skewed in federal towards federal just because of some of the COVID numbers that have been added. But as you can see, more than 2/3 of total city revenue total revenue comes from taxes, and with other revenues, fines, fees, added on top of that makes up the largest portion of our revenue sources.
Jonathan, if you could go back to the bars in the previous
Sure.
graph. It's true that our forecast is for increasing amounts from various taxes. What's not shown here is the big decrease from the last fiscal year, 2020, to now in the forecast of most of the taxes. Particularly the sales tax and hotel tax have been decimated. The income taxes are doing better, but still they're lower than they were in 2020, and far lower than what we predicted the last time we made a forecast before the pandemic. So the pandemic has really taken a hit to city tax revenue, and that's not shown here. If you'd see it if we saw the 2020 bars.
So in terms of balancing the budget, I'm not going to get into the really specifics, but as I said before, the January plan has to show a balanced budget. Some of the things they do to balance the budget is access reserves. In this year, they've accessed $1.6 billion of retiree health benefit trust fund, which is to go to pay for retiree health benefits. They've also accessed they've rolled some money from the prior year. They're also rolling some money into the next year. and they've drawn down on reserves, capital stabilization and general reserves, to balance the plan. And they have some of this reserves in the out years as well. So they have some flexibility to balance those, to reduce those out year gaps. Plus they also, there've been a lot of talk about other savings, and including labor savings. And there's $1 billion of labor savings built into this plan, which hasn't yet been determined. You wouldn't see that here. So there is definitely work ahead to be closing these gaps. And so that kind of segues into into the idea of budget options. And this is one of the things that it's not a charter mandate for the IBO, but it's been something that's been developed over the years to present each year, maybe even multiple times a year, whether they be additional revenues, reductions in expenditures, a number of different options that can be used for elected officials or for the public to support, to speak with their elected officials. And each budget option, obviously there's a lot of discussion among staff, and each budget option is presented in a nonpartisan way. We present both what supporters of the option may say, what the non-supporters, what do we use the word?
Opponents.
Opponents, right? That's the word. Sorry, I don't know if that's the appropriate word, but opponents of some of these ideas, and we try to lay out a savings or a revenue total number annually within it. Although obviously these are just our estimates based on, some of them are a little rougher, some of them are a little more certain. And each year we try to update some of the older ones as well. And then some fall off for a variety of reasons. In fact, some of the good reasons are they've actually been initiated. And in getting ready for this, I looked through some older option books, and I noticed a couple of the options. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head that no longer are in the current volume, but for reasons that basically because they've been initiated. And so I think that this is a good resource for groups like you, or for obviously elected officials to use to get some ideas. And in fact, actually OMB, the city's Office of Management and Budget, I've spoken to them, and they've actually have commented and said that they like to use this to get ideas as well. So it's nice that we know that these things are being used and being considered. So now I'm going to turn it over to Michael, at least for the first half, because Michael will discuss some of the revenue options specifically related to tax revenue that are in the current volume. And Michael.
Okay, I've listed just some of the options that we present. I've listed the ones that tend to bring in more money than some of the smaller ones. We have a whole lot of options about increasing fines for this, that, and the other. Those bring in anywhere from $1 to $10 million in revenue. But these are the big guns here. A lot are related to the real estate tax, property tax. There's the bill that was in Albany to establish a pied-à-terre tax. And just to repeat what Jonathan said, or I don't know if you said it quite like this, the city is a creation under state law, and as such, it does not really have the power to make changes in its tax rates, its tax code, without state legislative approval. The only thing it is allowed to do on its own is alter the property tax rate. So there's a number of options relating to property tax, establish a pied-à-terre tax, raise the cap on property tax assessment increases. Currently, for single, 2, and 3 family houses, assessments can go up no more than 6% a year or 20% over 5 years. We've priced out an option that if you increased those parameters to say 8% a year and 30% over 5 years, this is what you would get. And it's because property tax assessment increases phase in over 5 years. You see that the first year you only get 156 million if this were adopted, and it rises to at least 500 million by the fifth year. A mansion tax is something that would be imposed on the real property transfer tax. There's a mortgage recording tax currently. People that buy co-ops are not taxed because technically the loan you get to buy a co-op is not a mortgage, because a co-op is not solid property. Co-op is a share in a corporation, not solid property like a condo. Big one that's, I think, almost in the middle of your district, eliminate the property tax exemption for Madison Square Garden. And then years ago, the city instituted a co-op condo property tax abatement because I think IBO can take a lot of credit for this. We pointed out that single-family homeowners in general have a smaller tax burden when you define the tax burden as their property taxes relative to the market value of their property. This is not uniform across the city, but anyway, the city established this abatement program, and we did further analysis and found out it was generally going to some of the wealthier neighborhoods and some wealthier neighborhoods where, in fact, the tax burden was quite low. And I'm just going through these quickly. I'd be glad to talk to anyone. You can call me or write me, and if you're particularly interested in finding out the details, or you can read the options volume on our website. People are always asking about what we get for restoring the commuter tax. That's one thing that was taken away from New York City by the state legislature without any input from the city. Normally, the polite thing to do is to get the city council to issue a home rule message, which states basically to Albany, this change that you're proposing is something we agree to. That was not done in the case of abolishing the commuter tax, which, by the way, the state happens to retain its commuter tax. Then taxing high-income residents at a higher marginal rate, and also limiting the credit against the personal income tax that residents who also pay the unincorporated business tax, they get a credit against a certain amount of their liability. And if you cap that at $10,000 of taxpayer, you would get about $77 million. There's a few other ones I present here. What can I say? Extending the corporate tax to insurance companies has been proposed. Insurance companies are taxed by the state and federal government. They're not taxed in the city. Carried interest is a form of earnings that hedge fund managers get as a percentage of the earnings of their from the management of their portfolios. It's taxed at a lower rate, and this is a nationwide issue, but it's also a local issue. And the thought was we could structure this so that it was taxed under the unincorporated business tax, not the personal income tax. Pilot stands for payments in lieu of taxes. A lot of nonprofit organizations pay a pilot in lieu of their property tax exemption, and this would extend pilots to private higher education institutions and hospitals. And I think that's about it. I know, there's a lot that can be said, but I'd like to see later if there's any questions. We can talk more about anything, or as I said, feel free to contact me at the office and tell you what I know, or get you in touch with someone who knows the issue better than I do.
just conclude with some of the expense items that we have. And there are a number of them. As you saw from Michael's portion of this, the revenue options tend to be a lot larger in scope in terms of the how their effect on the city's finances. A lot of what we have proposed in terms of expense options, reduced expenditures on certain things are a little bit smaller. I've highlighted some of the larger ones as Michael did with his, but if you take a look at our overall plan, they're in the $10 to $20 million range or smaller, which is real money. But of course, when you're talking about a budget of $100 billion almost, it doesn't make that big and have that big an effect. But some of the larger actual revenue or expense options are related to one of the largest portions of the budget, which is PS costs. And so we have a number of options that are related to lowering wage or benefits. One of the newest ones we have, which we just added this year, was after there was some discussion about either doing among the managerial pay free, or not a pay freeze, but a managerial savings on what are they called? Sorry, what were they? Anyway, doesn't matter. But what we proposed was reducing or eliminating any increases over the course of the next few years, and estimated that we could save $1 billion related to any pay increases that would come to the city's various unions. A lot of or a number of our options are related to retiree healthcare and other retiree costs. Obviously, the pension is a guarantee, so some of those things can't really be reduced, but we can reduce retiree health coverage. That's not a guarantee. That's not a constitutional guarantee in New York State. So we've proposed some variety of them, not always eliminating, but reducing them. In addition, right now, Michael and I can both say, and anyone else who works for the city knows that there are a number of different health insurance options which have no payroll deductions. The large majority of city employees actually are in one of the eligible programs which have no payroll deductions, which I know people in other industries and private sector think is crazy. So there's an option we have for requiring city employees to contribute some sort of payroll deduction that would gain about $584 million. Of course, that's depending on how you put that option together. There's some annuity funds that are certain pension city employees get through, they're similar to pensions, that if we ended those contributions would save $155 million. And then, as I said, there's a number of other types of revenue expense reductions, mostly small, but some of the larger ones are related to increasing fees or reducing subsidies. A pay-as-you-throw program at the Department of Sanitation, again, depending on how you put it together, could, as we've estimated, increase revenues by $367 million. There's a number of, and the city's jail population has been declining, but there are definitely a number of people awaiting trial for more than a year who the state is supposed to reimburse the city for their expenses, and often does not for certain types. That we've, depending on the specifics and who you would include in these, we've estimated that'll save $347 million. And then, of course, there's always the private school transportation. The city provides transportation for private school students. This is a very contentious one. This would, not necessarily, this is probably a good example. Obviously, not all of these would be very easy to get done. We don't necessarily publish items that we think are low-hanging fruit and things that can, might not have political costs. And those are usually spelled out that in the what opponents may say. And so this is an example of one of those types of options that we've presented. Even as a city employee, I probably wouldn't support some of these other lowering wage and benefit costs, but we also, we have to be fair and include those as well. There's a number, as I said, there's a number of other ones. You just can go to our website, and it's right there on the front page, and you can scroll through a number of these. These are just some of the examples. And yeah, so thank you very much. We'll stop sharing now.
If I may add just a small note, again, these are options that we present. A lot of times they're groups like community boards or elected officials ask us to look into something. The advocates for various social service agencies often have a list of things that they want priced out. But Jonathan, twice I think you used the verb propose or the noun proposal. And it's a proposal in the sense that we're presenting it as something that could be done, maybe not politically feasible at all, but something that could be done. But it's not a proposal in the sense that we think it should be done. Again, we're nonpartisan, and our arguments for and arguments against column that you'll see in each of these options is an attempt to recognize what the benefits or the possible detriments to pursuing any of these options. So yeah, they're proposals, but they're not things we endorse.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you, Jonathan. This is really, so on your website, just to be clear, we can go and each of these will have the pros and the cons, as you mentioned, on the website, and we can dig into it more. Thank you. I'm gonna turn to the participants and oh, my screen just did something funny. And ask everyone if they have questions, if they could raise their hand. I see that Joe already has his hand raised, and I want to thank Joe Mafia because he was instrumental in arranging this presentation. So Joe, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. And Jonathan, thank you for all your help when I was bugging you with all those questions that you fielded, and thank you, Michael. You guys, the one area that concerns me about the budget is about 25% that seems to be beyond the control related to post-retirement health benefits and post-retirement employee benefit plans. What you had mentioned about changes to the Constitution. Can you talk about what the process is if there were to be changes to the post-retirement, which is mostly unfunded? If there were changes to that, how would that come about? Who's responsible for that?
Well, so there's two things. There's pension benefits, which are protected by the state constitution, and they cannot be reduced. They're guaranteed. And then there's the health benefits, the post-retirement health benefits, which is also has now, according to some accounting requirements now, has in the last few years had to have been published in our CAFR, the liability for those. And as you said, Joe, it's quite large. There's I don't know the number. I think it's 80 or 90. It's a large, many billion-dollar number that's been unfunded. There's no requirement as of now for the city to actually fund that, as there is with the pensions, because there's no constitutional guarantee to any of the retirees that their health costs. Right now, retirees get the same health options as city employees. So, they get to choose from the same, and these are obviously pre-Medicare. Once they reach a certain age, they qualify for that. But so most retirees can qualify for, as I said, essentially free medical, no paycheck deduction medical coverage. And so there has been, starting, I think it was in the Bloomberg years, it might have predated Bloomberg, but I believe an attempt to pre-fund these liabilities. And so that was done as there was no requirement to do this. As I said, this is just a reporting requirement, but ostensibly this was used as a rainy day fund, and it has been tapped in as a rainy day fund, and has not, and by the current administration and the previous administration, they both funded it in good years and tapped into it in years when they needed to balance their budgets, and have used it as a rainy day fund, essentially. There could, at the state level, there may, and maybe even in the accounting, be a requirement to actually fund this OPEB liability. I don't know what the future holds. And so if there was some desire at the state level to create, to add to the state constitution and to guarantee this as a benefit, I could foresee that I don't know if I don't foresee it definitely happening, but if that happened, then this would be something that the city couldn't just use as a rainy day fund for all intents and purposes, and would have to move towards funding in full. And as I said, the liability right now is almost as big as the city budget itself. So it would take a number of years, and that would be obviously problematic. Right now, we essentially fund our retiree health benefits on a pay-as-you-go basis, like most other city expenses, unlike pensions, but I'm not sure if that answers your question necessarily, or just kind of.
No, it did, but just for clarification. So in the Constitution, it says that the post health benefits is not guaranteed, but it says pensions is.
I'm not sure if it specifically says that it's not guaranteed, but it definitely says that pensions are guaranteed, and you cannot reduce. Once you're in a pension, you cannot have your benefits reduced. You can create a new pension tier, which has obviously been done a number of times over the years. Pension tier 6 was created 8 or 9 years ago, and any new city employees or city employees who are in certain pension plans are enrolled in pension in tier 6, which has less benefits than prior years. So they can create new tiers that have lower benefits, but they can't. If you're in a tier, you can't have your benefits reduced from that tier.
Thank you.
If I may add a couple of things. One of the things, the right side of the pension cost is that there are fewer and fewer people alive that are collecting benefits under the very generous first couple of tiers of pension system. I'm thinking of a relative of mine in Florida that retired and just gets more money now than he did when he was working. So, but I had a question for Jonathan or anyone who may know the answer. Does there have to be a constitutional convention to propose a change in the Constitution and enact it?
Imagine so, but I don't know at the state level how that works, like we do on a charter revision. I don't know the last time we did that at the state level.
Interesting. That's interesting. I just have a question. Of all the options that you presented, you said some were low-hanging fruit, some were not. What percentage are things that the city can do on its own, and what percentage involves the state or some other entity?
In a total, in a numbers or in a value, because I'm sure the value is some of the bigger value number things would require state. The smaller ones, especially on the expense side, the city could do alone. Some of the expense things, the $1 billion savings for a freeze in salaries, the city could do without anything from the state. But I believe, and Michael can speak to this, a lot of the taxation ones would have to go through the state.
I think most of them would. There was one I was reading about where I think there was some room for the city to do something on its own. I don't think it was one of the real big ticket items. So, but yeah, that's a real problem with doing anything on the tax side. And I'd say none of them really are low-hanging fruit, unfortunately, for the city.
Thank you. I see Joseph's hand is raised. Joseph?
Yeah, thanks, Renee. And thanks, Michael and Jonathan. These are really interesting ideas. Some of them I had not heard before. I have 3 simple questions. The first one is, say there's a worst case scenario with the city's budget, where the gap is just too big for anyone to figure out how to fill and there's no federal assistance, like something like the 1970s. Is a municipal bankruptcy the only way that those pension obligations would be able to be reduced? I know that happened in Detroit. Is that something that could happen here in some, hopefully something that'll never come to pass?
Michael, you wanna-
I don't think we've quite examined that because the city economy is certainly in a much, much better place in the last 20, 25 years than it was in the 1970s. So it's interesting. My brother lives in Detroit and was sort of involved with the bankruptcy there. And I have to ask him to what extent, that, yeah, I know that it did take away some earnings and pension from city workers. I don't know if that was, if that automatically, the fact that there was a bankruptcy automatically meant that any other prior commitments, if they were in the state legislature, if that they were made null and void at that point. I think that I know there's a lot of negotiation. Certainly there was in Detroit when they declared bankruptcy.
Thanks. Another question. So this mansion tax that was on the revenue options, could you explain, I'm assuming this is different from the tax that was levied, I think 2 years ago by the state that allowed for a tax on properties over $1 million. Is this a separate tax?
Well, it would be a separate, and well, first of all, in that it would be for city it would go to the city as revenue, not the state. I know I had printed this out, so I want to just get the details correct. It would be something that would, where is it? I'm sorry, not as organized as should be. Seem to have lost my real estate tax folder. Go on to your third question while I find my folder, and I'll come back to it.
Yeah, the citywide pay freeze, the other option that you raised. So we talked about this a lot when we were discussing, budget options last year, especially with the NYPD, because we were trying to figure out where all that NYPD spending went. Is by a citywide pay freeze, do you mean just freeze salaries and also, cut out new hiring, or does it just mean freeze salaries? You're still allowed to hire, but not at any increased rates.
So again, obviously, any of these options can have a variety of different ways you can put them together, and in as particularly something as large scale and would cover so many people. So specifics of this one was that we were just talking about freezing pay for over a certain period of time. I think it was over 3 years. The usual contract periods, union contracts are usually 3 to 4 years, depending. Most administrations like to keep them in one one term, so they don't overlap or they don't restrict future administrations necessarily. So I think we were looking at a 3 or 4 year period in which everybody got 0% essentially. Sometimes for the most recent contract period, most of the non-uniforms got on average 2% increases per year. And that's pretty typical, I guess, over the past few. Some of the contracts have been larger in good years. Assuming we had the next round of contracts were all zeros, and the savings is obviously the savings as compared to what the alternative would have been. And so we had to compare it to if everyone got a 2% increase or a 1.5% increase. I don't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember the specific calculations. I'd have to go look back at our spreadsheets, or maybe it even says it in the. But assuming that we didn't give the alternative, which had been 1.5%, 2% per year, what would it mean to the city in terms of savings? So, again, we could have formulated this in a number of different ways. The assumptions are important. But in the end, it didn't have to do with hiring per se, or restricting hiring. It was only, we will not give any pay increases for a term, I believe 3 years.
Okay.
But we could change that, and the number could change also. I think that's how we kind of present it to when we present these things. Is obviously there's a lot of different options that could provide a range of savings. This isn't the only number. Some options are a little different. Some options are, if you're going to do this, the savings is this, but some have a lot more leeway for the legislators or whoever is deciding on the policy.
Yes, the options often come with, choices we make about what parameters. For example, the commuter tax option is, what would a commuter tax be? What would a commuter tax bring in if your commuter tax was like it was 20 some years ago when it got abolished? And that's a tax rate of 0.45% on wage income and 0.65, I believe, on non-wage income earned in the city. Some people have proposed a much higher tax rate for commuters. Back to the mansion tax, that's a tax that is paid through the real property transfer tax. And indeed, the state did put a tax on additional tax on houses or real estate selling for more than $1 million. Our option would be, yes, let's add on to that another option for property sold in the city and let that additional tax go to the city, be part of city revenue.
All right, thank you.
Mary, I see your hand.
Thanks, Renee. Echoing what Joe said, thanks to Jonathan and Michael, it's been really informative. And I know that your expertise is primarily with the city budget, but when I hear discussions about demanding prepayment for the retiree benefits, is that analogous to what, I forget if it was Bush 1 or Bush 2 did to the post office, which really fucked up their whole funding scenario, and budget hawks now use that as an excuse for cutbacks? I just wonder if it's sort of analogous and that we ought to be a bit cautious about just charging forward and demanding prepayment, because in the long run, it's really come back to bite us on a federal level with the post office.
I'd have to do a little more research on that. I know I've read some stuff about what exactly happened with them. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they were told they had a benefit that they had to fulfill in a certain number of years, and they had to fully fund it. I'm not sure how if there was to be some legislation at the state level that required us to fully fund our OPEB liability, I would assume that wouldn't be that, in that short period of time. Right now, while we do fully fund our pension liability in each year as determined by the actuary, even in years when we have, because part of this is our return on our investment. We have a huge investment of the existing pension assets. And if we do not meet that 7%, say, in a given year, the city as the employer has to make up that difference. We don't have to make up that difference in 1 year. If we have a year in which the pension systems have 0% return, the city doesn't have to make up that 7% in year one. It's actually allocated over a number of years. So, and that's just that, and that number is obviously a lot smaller in terms of what the city would owe than the total OPEB liability. So I can't imagine. I don't know. I mean, anything's possible, but I would assume if the event came that we had to fully fund our OPEB liability, including retiree health benefits, that they would create some formula that would allow us to, put that out over a certain period of time, 20 years, 30 years, because 30 years is usually the number of years of what they consider to be the life of an employee from the date they start employment to when they retire from city. Not necessarily how many years they work in the city, but how many years from their start date to their retirement date. And that's an average. So it's a hypothetical situation. It's obviously something that we wouldn't want to have to incur if it did happen. And there was, in the creation of the retiree health benefit trust, that was an attempt to get a handle on this before something like this ever happened. But as I said, once we hit some pretty rough patches, it's been used to fund keep from making cuts to other parts of the budget. So we haven't really, there's only $2 billion in it right now. And I say only, but you know, when you're talking about an $80 to $90 billion liability, we don't really have a good handle on that. So yes, if it turned out that that came to be, there would be a lot of negotiations probably about how the city would get to that point, and we'd have to cross that bridge.
Thank you. Does any of the other members of the committee have a question for Jonathan or Michael? I just have one more. Could you speak to the genesis of the Madison Square Garden tax, and is that something state or city or?
No, I can't really. About my boss, the Deputy Director George Sweeting, who worked in property tax issues at Department of Finance before coming to IBO, has talked about the original negotiation on that, and I can't even remember how far back that was. Maybe you know more, Jonathan, but it's seen as, you know, quite a gift at this point, given the money that you know, is made at Madison Square Garden. So at ComCan, and so I don't know, Jonathan, do you know when this began? I can find that out, and I'll email you.
I think I've heard the same stories from George that you've heard as well, and I don't recall specifically the numbers. I do know they're spending a lot of money on ads as well, supporting candidates, assuming that has something to do with it, because I believe some of their, not this portion, but their exemptions or something are expiring soon, right? That's not what we're talking about here, though.
Thank you so much. Any more questions from the committee? I'm scrolling through and I'm seeing no hands. I'm going to move to the attendees. Any questions for Jonathan or Michael from our attendees? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to thank you very much. This has been incredibly informative. I'm going to go to the website, I think, often, and you'll probably hear from me very often from here on out, but really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Joe, for arranging this. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for having us. It was
Very welcome. Thanks.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move now to our next item. Tristan, there we go.
You see it?
I see something.
Kristen, I think you might be sharing a separate screen. Do you have a dual monitor set up?
I do. Let me see if I can unplug it. Is that better at all?
No. We're seeing the colored screen. No.
Do have it pulled up on my computer if you'd like. Kristen?
Hi. Yeah, that might be best. Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, can you see this presentation?
Yes.
Great.
Great. So if you want to just go to the next slide. So just as an introduction, so Rachel and I had been doing some research into air quality generally at Renee's request. And then when Renee caught sight of a few bills that had been proposed and reviewed by the Committee of Environmental Protection, she thought this would be a good time to give a presentation on where we stand and potentially come to a view on, or a decision on how we stand on the bills under consideration. So if you want to go to the next slide. So just at a high level, and we're going to go super granular, but air quality is obviously important. It impacts all of us, and it especially can have negative impacts on our health, and especially onto certain subgroups of the populations, like those with asthma, heart or lung disease, older adults, children and teens, and those who are active outdoors. Some of the negative health outcomes include, that full list: death, cancer, heart attacks, depression, suicide, missed school and work days, et cetera. And we've seen even in this recent COVID epidemic that populations that are in areas that have poor air quality are disproportionately impacted by the virus, and are experiencing negative health outcomes. In terms of like what the populations that are or the pollutants that are considered to be key, that list here: the fine particulate matter, ground level ozone, carbon monoxide, and number of oxides and lead levels are regulated by the EPA and are those of the main concern. And sources are that full list: motor vehicles, power plants, factories, and fuel combustion processes, which is especially relevant to our district given the number of transit corridors, and number of products that are produced and consumed. Could you go to the next slide? So this is just to give you a little overview of the monitoring infrastructure that we have in place at the city and state level. So there are like a number of programs that go on, but these two are the most granular, like ongoing ones that are carried out. So first and primarily is the New York City Community Era Survey. So this is a program jointly managed by the New York City Health Department and CUNY, and it's been going on since 2008. And basically, if you look at this map, there are 60 to 100 sites that are reviewed annually via sensors mounted on street lights. So that's 10 to 12 feet off the ground. So it's generally capturing the air that we're breathing. Back when it was first rolled out in 2008, there were 150 sites. But when the global financial crisis came upon us, they scaled it back to 60 sites and then increased it a bit over time. So now it's generally around 70 to 90 a year. So 80% of these sites were randomly located, and then 20% of them were strategically placed to fill gaps in coverage or to be by certain key locations like Times Square. So each one of these sites are monitored for a 2-week period each season. So that's 4 weeks, that's 8 weeks each year, and it's monitored on an ongoing basis. So in a given 2-week period, the same amount of sensors are being monitored across the city. It's not like these are all being monitored 2 weeks each season or at a given time. It rotates around. And then there are 3 reference sites that are monitored on a continuous basis, and that helps them adjust the data to deal with any fluctuations in the general environment for when they create their models. And so in that list, Luke, I think we moved screens.
Uh-oh. Yeah,
Oh, you got it. Yep. Can you go back up, Luke? Yep. So in that like picture you see before you, the ones that are dark blue, those are the ones that are operative today. Of the originating sites. The light blue ones were in the original plan, but then over time, during the global financial crisis, they were disabled. And then the orange sites, there are 15 of them. They started to be monitored a couple of years ago, and were targeting some like lower income populations or areas that they wanted to get more info on. And then at the state level, it's not as comprehensive in New York City as you'd expect. There are 50 sites statewide, 19 in New York City, and none in Community Board 5. And these sensors are located on the roofs of the buildings, and they're monitored on an ongoing basis and reporting daily. And so this data gets fed to the EPA. And so when you look at your phone, you're getting air quality reports. This is kind of where that's coming from. And so the location on the building roofs is important because you're not necessarily breathing the air that it's testing, because a lot of this pollution gathers on the ground, especially like fine particles, which are generally considered to be like the worst pollution, as well as ground level ozone. And so the state also is involved in a number of other programs, but these are the two most granular, robust monitoring that we have in place. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of how the data has fluctuated over time, this slide and the next basically focuses on a number of pollutants. And the good news is there's been substantial improvement citywide for almost all of the pollutants that are measured. But certain areas do remain elevated. So if you take a look at the black carbon as an example, the 2009 column shows a map of the pollution levels citywide, and obviously dark red is worse than light yellow. And then you'll see that the comparison to 28 is pretty great. The average change citywide was at like a 33% improvement, but you'll note that it's not uniform across the city in a lot of these areas that have a lot of areas of high traffic or industry or have a lot of boilers and building density. They have higher levels of pollution. And I would definitely point out that, like, if you look at our district, given our status as having a lot of transit corridors within it, for a lot of these pollutants, we do still have high levels of pollution. Could you go to the next slide, Luke? But like I said, there's been like a lot of improvement, and I would just point out that, like, on the winter sulfur ozone rates, they actually can't even measure it by and large, the pollution level on a citywide basis, because it's decreased so much. And so, like, I'm not going to go into the commentary, but it just basically calls out the trends that they identify in the data. Could you next slide, Luke? So just at a high level analysis, the past policy interventions that the city council has taken do appear to be working. So most notably, we banned the combustion of number 6 fuel oil after 2015. And we're generally, like, encouraging them to move to cleaner fuel solutions. And that's predominantly credited for that 95% decrease in the sulfur oxide you saw. And then we've also mandated the phase out of number 4 fuel oil for heating purposes by 2030, as well as a number of, like, administrative actions, like increasing the use of electric vehicles in the city fleet, requiring cleaner truck fuel, and strengthening the anti-idling programs. But like I pointed out on the map, and it was very clear, it's not uniform. A lot of communities that have high rates of poverty or high racial and ethnic minority compositions were less likely to upgrade to cleaner heating systems. And those areas were also more likely to have environmentally damaging infrastructure like power plants. And then more applicable to CP5, areas of high traffic activity and density of buildings with heat and hot water boilers in industrial areas continue to have far higher levels of most pollutants. And then the key takeaway that we had when we were doing our initial research was that the monitoring infrastructure just seems to be lacking for a city of our size. Their New York City sites are sparse and scattered and only has a few of them active at a given point in time, whereas the New York State sites are also very few, and they're elevated on the roof of buildings and therefore not testing what pedestrians are breathing. Many areas of key concerns like transit hubs, high traffic corridors, and recreational areas that have a lot of children and other at-risk populations frequenting them are not monitored with sufficient granularity and frequency. And it's not really able to be used on a day-to-day basis to respond to any fluctuations that are identified. It's more of the longer term view. Next slide, please. So in terms of what the Committee of Environmental Protection was reviewing, so there were 3 bills that were under review. So the first one, so if you go to the next slide, Luke, the first one, which we kind of felt was the most relevant to our committee, and I think that and is consistent with stance that we've taken in the past with our budget requests, is a law to amend the administrative code to ramp up air quality monitoring at heavy use thoroughfares. And so the legislation would amend the administrative code to define certain terms. So heavy use thoroughfare would be corridors with traffic volume greater than the 50th percentile on the citywide basis, or have more than 100,000 vehicles annually travel on it. Recreational areas would be like any parks, playgrounds, etc., locations that abut one of these thoroughfares. And then at-risk populations would be infants, kids, pregnant women, and elderly adults, and those with weakened immune systems. And so what this legislation would do was it requires the installation of street level monitors along those thoroughfares at a minimum of 2 major intersections of each thoroughfare, and at every recreational area. And additionally, it would also require the issuance of an annual report to the mayor and the speaker of the city council that would also get published to the public that contains the results of those monitoring efforts, and also includes whether or not the amounts that are measured violates the existing standards set by the EPA. And so I'll note that like it doesn't establish new standards, it just increases our monitoring capabilities to help us identify if we're failing to keep our air clean. And then for those cases where exposure levels violate the existing standards that we have in place, or based on the most up-to-date research poses a danger to public health, the environment, or at-risk populations, it requires the Department of Environmental Protection to work with the Secretary of Transportation and the Education Department to develop and implement mitigation measures to lower those risks. And next slide, Luke. So then the other proposed bills under consideration, which I'm not going to go into as deep detail in, are one bill would move the gradual phase out of number 4 fuel oil from 2030 under current legislation to 2025. And so that would basically accelerate the time plan that's already in place. And the last one at the bottom would amend the city council charter to require the Office of Long-Term Planning and Sustainability to track all New York State DEC reports on power plants within Manhattan and submit comments on proposed permit renewals. And so in New York, the state has pretty much full control over these power plants. The city doesn't actually have like the responsibility or the approval ability over these permits. It goes to the state. And so this would basically just add a requirement that we would have to submit a report every time one of these permits come up. Next slide, please. And then just to summarize some of the positions that stakeholders had on these bills. And so this was pulled from the testimony at the committee and some of the submitted materials. You'll note that there was no group that was opposed to the traffic monitoring bill, whereas some feedback for the move up of the transition to banning number 4 heating oil, it was a bit more of a mixed bag, but predominantly it was in favor. The main argument against by the Rent Stabilization Association was that like we put in place a plan back in 2010 and it would be disruptive to change up those plans at this point. But you know, it was, like I said, most of the people were still in favor of that. And then with regards to 992, there was one group that had that thought that we should pass this, the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, because they're trying to push to get rid of these power plants and move to more sustainable power production. But by and large, most of the groups didn't express opinions on it. So that's my presentation. Nick, did I cover anything? Is there anything you feel like I did not cover in my presentation?
No, I mean, you hit on most everything that I think I would have thought to say. Yeah, perhaps the only thing I can sort of add just to kind of build on, what you mentioned about RSA is that, yes, they have been very adamant for a number of years now that this agreement that they had made with the Bloomberg administration in 2010 should basically be sacrosanct, and that any attempt to modify it in any way is an affront to to them, to public policy, to, to any number of things. And I suppose, to editorialize a little bit, but, again, I work for an elected official. It's what we do. I think that even what we knew about the rate of climate change in 2010 should have probably necessitated a more robust and quicker timeline. But everything that we knew or have learned since then, only backs it up more. And as was said, that I believe it was, Parliament cannot be held to any particular agreement, right? That they sort of, the idea of the legislature having like, not quite plenary power, but right, like significant power to go back and sort of re-examine whether or not things need to be changed. I think that we have long felt that was the case here. So, but no, I think your presentation was excellent, and you, I think you hit everything that I might have thought to go into, especially with, showing the, the maps of, from the Community Era Survey.
Thank you so much, Tristan. And I know, Rachel, you worked on this, and Nick, thank you for being here. Nick, can you just tell us where this is in the council at this point, the bills?
Sure. So, okay. So yeah, we had the hearing. The administration was, generally supportive of these. I think that, unsurprisingly, the one thing that they flagged with, particularly with 960, was that, I think that they are worried about cost, since, as you mentioned, many of the original monitors were decommissioned because of the 2008 crisis. And, now that we're in a situation where even if perhaps the budget may not be quite as dire as we thought it might have been, close to a year ago at this point, they're still concerned about what we just heard, right? It might look like moving forward for at least a near-term future. To what extent is there going to be pushback for, whether or not, I think that, like the definition of what you talked about, like a heavy use thoroughfare, will that be, will they look to a sort of, if we're able to get to sort of a negotiating process in terms of passing the bill, since, for those who may not follow, if you don't follow council legislation very much, typically we don't have multiple hearings on bills. Like, it can happen on occasion, but, typically we have the hearing, we gather public feedback, and then, we will work with the administration, and we'll try to work with like all the stakeholders who came and testified at the hearing and who have been kind of engaged in this to sort of negotiate out a bill that is, if not broadly acceptable to everyone, at least broadly acceptable to as big a group as we can have it. So I think that the administration is generally, as I was saying, the administration is generally supportive, but do fiscal concerns come up potentially in terms of, does heavy use thoroughfare, is it possible they might try to say, perhaps we should raise that to what, greater than the 60th or 65th percentile of street traffic within, looking citywide or something like that. But I think that we have been working on these bills for a while. We've carried these bills for, I think, at least 5 years now. In fact, you'll see, I think in 980, right, it has to be one of the amendments that we're going to have to include would change the date, because it still refers to March of 2018 as being like a target date. So But I think that especially with this being the last year of my boss's term, there are a number of things we would really like to try to wrap up, and we're hoping that this will be one of them.
Thank you so much. Okay, what I'm going to do is open up the floor for questions from the committee about the legislation. Particularly, I want to focus, obviously the three bills are together, but I want to focus on 960, which is the air monitoring, which is something that I think you'll all recall, have asked for in our budget funding year upon year. So do I see any questions from our committee? Any questions at all? I see Joseph Furr.
All right, thanks, Renee. If you haven't done this, no worries, but I was just curious. I was also thinking about the definition of heavy use thoroughfare. I mean, if you're really, gonna require monitors at least 2 intersections of every single heavy use thoroughfare, isn't that half of all streets in New York City? I guess I kind of share Nick's concern, or maybe Nick, it wasn't a concern, but like I want a lot more of these air monitors, but that sounds to me like it would add thousands more. So I guess I just wanted to get a sense of whether I'm estimating that right, or am I misunderstanding the definition?
No, I mean, I think that is a fair concern. I mean, I think that there have been times where we have drafted bills that, the very first drafts or like the original version ends up, with a very expansive, comprehensive definition. And this has happened not just with this, it's happened with, I know we've done bills on lead and soil in the past, which parks do we look at, which even in some cases like private yards or fields near near like certain, again, heavy use thoroughfares as sort of an aside, like this sort of ties back to it, right? When you're looking at, even though lead and gasoline has been banned for, close to 40 years, there are places where you may still have, sometimes a little bit buried deeper in the sediments, but you may still have like traces of leaded gasoline, like particles in the soil. But looking at looking at something that is like a potentially a very expansive view of the situation, and then probably cutting it back and paring it back depending on where we think we may need to target the most, where we may need to focus our resources. So that's I would say that's something that I think we definitely are thinking about, because it has it has been a factor in our legislation before, and sort of taking the view of starting to think about it from the most broad terms and then trying to sort of more finely tune it so that we are focusing on where the need for a change in public policy is the greatest.
Thanks, Nick. It sounds like that you're potentially open to sort of defining and clarifying and what exactly a major thoroughfare would be in the context of the bill. I think that's what I hear you saying.
Yes.
Kristen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, do you know by chance what the cost is of like installing a single monitor?
That I'm not sure of offhand. However, we are actually at a good time where, we in a few weeks, I don't think we have an exact date yet. I'd be happy to get back to you once we do. But the preliminary budget hearing will be coming up. So, we can get, as we look to try to get this bill done this year, we can try to get some more clarity from DEP on that.
Thank you, Nick. Mary, I saw your hand. I think it might have went down, so I don't want to call on you unless, did you have a question?
I did. I don't know if it's answerable in this session, but are there live data that actually parse out, for instance, some of these toxins like the nitric oxide and dioxide and the fine particles? We're talking about both high traffic and the boilers. And so I'm just wondering if we have even a guesstimate or maybe something more solid about what is contributing most to, the persistent problems, especially I'm shocked to look at these maps and the improvement, for instance, in the Bronx versus CB5. I don't know, it's just not adding up. And that would inform my decision more towards intro 980 than, 960, which I think is a no-brainer.
I think that it can depend upon the, like this is something that I'm not, I believe that, DEP and DOH may have this data, but that it can be like, if you can perhaps sort of factor in not just like one of the criteria pollutants, but several of them. I think that it's possible in certain instances that sort of figuring out the mix of which pollutants where can probably help to some extent in sort of pinpointing exactly whether or not it's like a stationary source, so like a boiler versus whether it's traffic or a mobile source. But I mean, I think that in the case of very generally speaking for both CB5 and for the city generally, it is usually a mixture of vehicles and actual boiler emissions. That's one of the reasons why I think that there are a lot of places in for instance the Bronx where you've actually seen in some of the criteria a lot better numbers, because where you don't necessarily have that massive density, right, that hub effect that you have with sort of the sort of Midtown area, where it's more about the buildings. And then of course obviously there are some places where on the periphery you have the traffic, but where you can kind of target it more and see more the effects of the buildings and the the benefit of taking the fuel oil out of the buildings, that you can see that where it's more about that being the main factor that we've gotten the significant drop, and then where you've still got the mixture of significant vehicular traffic and a lot of sort of high density buildings that may be sort of shifting their fuel, but probably still use, they're obviously going to be burning fossil fuels to some extent.
Nick, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to follow on to that, maybe this piggybacks on Mary's point. Is there any programs that exist to help those perhaps low-income communities trade over to a new fuel system? I don't know if it requires a boiler change or anything like that. So have there been any programs initiated that maybe would facilitate any of those changes if you want to speed up the program?
I mean, there have been a number of them. NYSERDA has a few. The city, like as a number of different things that like the city has been doing some. Like one of the biggest ones that is not just about boilers, but just generally is the retrofit accelerator. This was created a few years ago by the city, and it has been expanded, although we need to expand it a lot more. That's another sort of budget issue, but it has been expanded in response to our passage of Local Law 97. But that can definitely help, not just with turning over your boiler, but with weatherization, with just like efficiency generally.
Got it. Thank you. Tristan, I see your hand is raised.
Sorry, I never unraised it.
Oh, okay. Other panelists, Charles, I see your hand.
Thank you, Renee. And Tristan and Rachel, thanks for a great presentation. And Nick, thanks for being with us. I have just a quick question about 960. Is it the intent of the introduction that the agencies would have the power to act, to implement corrective measures. So they would identify the measures that are appropriate and they would act to implement them without any further action by the city council or any other part of government?
I think you could, it's fair to say to the extent that they are empowered to, right? You know, I think as to kind of refer back to the budget conversation earlier, right? As always, there are a number of areas where the city may be preempted by either state or federal law. So, you know, to the extent that, for instance, we can seek to, if we want to try to reduce vehicular traffic by either by changing traffic patterns or, you know, implementing congestion pricing, or
imposing a toll or closing the street.
yeah, exactly. Like things like that we can do. You know, obviously we can't really directly regulate like tailpipe emissions. But right, like to the extent that, you know, the city may have the power to act, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. More questions from the committee? Any more questions from members of BEX on the three bills, particularly 960? Seeing no hands, I'm going to turn to our attendees to see if they have any questions on the bill. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to turn back to the BEX committee. We're going to go into business mode. This is when we discuss how we want to proceed. Again, if I could get some input into how members are thinking about this, where they stand. Tristan.
Sure. So I guess first on 960, I definitely am supportive of improving the monitoring infrastructure. I also do agree with like the hesitation about the 50th percentile. That just seems over-inclusive, but you know, that seems like something that's going to work itself out as it goes through the process. So I don't know if we need to necessarily, you know, be too concerned about that, or we could potentially, you know, include language like suggesting that threshold be increased. I definitely think that, you know, more monitoring would be better and like help us identify problems as they arise and respond to them quicker. And I think that charging someone to put in place plans if the air quality deteriorates past certain thresholds to like take action, I think that it was definitely essential in helping ensure the safety and health of New Yorkers. And then with regards to, you know, 980, you know, when I went into this, I was kind of thinking we would just take action on 960, but as I, you know, did more research and learned more about it and like read some of the feedback from stakeholders, it made me realize that like the case for 980 was very clear in terms of the improvements it would bring. And I was very surprised that like an organization like REBNY, someone which you would kind of consider to be reflexively against this, I was very surprised that they were actually in favor of it. And while they did, you know, mention, similar to the other group, about the need to have long-term strategic planning and stick to it, they said that the impact on residents and owners would be minimal. And, you know, since we saw the dramatic improvement that was delivered as we got rid of number 6 and started transitioning away from number 4, I think we would only get more of that as we, if we fully transition away from number 4 to more sustainable, healthier pollutants, not pollutants, oil. With regard to like the power plant one, I don't really have a strong desire to take action on it, just because we don't, there's not a big clamor to start taking advisory action. And like, as we're very familiar with, like, just because you advise on something doesn't mean that anything's really going to get done. And it's really going to incur an obligation onto the city, which it seemed like from reading the hearing transcript, they had better ways to shape the broader policy making experience, like rather than having to like opine on a specific power plant and its application, they would like work to collaborate with the DEC on like the broader strategic vision. So I don't really like, if people are eager to do it, it seems like it would be fine, but I don't really see a strong need to.
Thank you, Tristan. Other comments? Rachel.
I don't want to, say the same thing again. I just want to say that I agree with Tristan on both of those points. I think I have the same thought about Revney on 980 actually. And so just wanted to voice my support for those as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Other members of the committee, a view. I'm trying to get the temperature of the room in terms of supporting, not supporting these measures, particularly 960 and perhaps 980. Thoughts? So I have two members that have shared their thoughts. Okay, Joseph, thank you.
I mean, I talk a lot, so sorry. I agree completely with Tristan and Rachel. That's all.
Fabulous, thank you. Mary.
Sorry, I'm in agreement with Joseph, who's in agreement with Tristan and Rachel.
Thank you. I just want to get a sense of, how people were, I didn't want to assume. Zach. You're muted, Zach.
Am I still?
You're low.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that I'm still in agreement with Tristan and Rachel, and thanks for putting together that presentation.
Great. Chuck?
I agree as well. I'm a little concerned when this is not just an error monitoring bill. This is an instruction to these agencies to do whatever they want to do, as Nick indicated, within the level of their authority to significantly reduce. And so we're basically delegating that to these agencies. I'm okay with that. I'm a government guy, but I think that some could object to that, but I'm good with it.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to ask the committee one more time. Any other thoughts? Any counter ideas? Any other thoughts? So seeing none, I'm going to summarize. What I'm hearing is that we are very much in favor of 960. We are also in favor of 980. What we would say is that the high traffic areas to some extent should be defined and perhaps very specifically defined. And there should be language perhaps added that would define that threshold. And then in terms of 992, I'm not hearing any strong feelings supporting or otherwise. So I think if we could concentrate on 960 and 980, my understanding is that the committee is in favor. If that is in fact the case, I would need a motion.
So moved.
And
Second
for that motion, and Julie will take a vote.
Okay, Renee?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Zach? Okay, Mary?
Zach, what I don't know, Zach, I
think he said yes.
Oh, he did, okay.
Mary?
Yes.
Joseph?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Tristan?
Yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Blago? Is she still? Was that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Joe Mafia?
Yes.
Kim McCall?
I think she had to jump off.
Okay. Evan?
We're a yes, yes.
Chuck?
Yes.
Pete?
Yes.
Rachel?
Yeah.
And July?
Yes.
So motion passes. One thing that I will say is I don't think that our local electeds have signed on to this bill yet. So obviously our resolution will be shared with them. So thank you, everyone, for that. And thank you, Nick, for being here and answering our questions. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, and this will now go to the full board for, for the vote of the full board in our March cycle. I will now turn to Michelle. She's been so very, very patient. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle is from Streetwise, and she is going to tell us about her organization.
Thank you so much, and no worries on the patience here. I know this is kind of turning the tables for the evening. Thank you. My name is Michelle Stein, and I am the manager of volunteer experience for Streetwise Partners. One of our long-term volunteers, Simon, who is here this evening, introduced us to the idea of presenting to a local community board, and we feel very honored to have this opportunity to talk about who we are at Streetwise. So today I want to quickly run through a short presentation deck that will talk a little bit about who we are, who we serve, and how you can become a virtual mentor with Streetwise if it fits into your schedule. So just give me one moment to go ahead and share my screen. For those who are unfamiliar, we'll start off with a general overview of Streetwise. And to my knowledge, everyone is probably unfamiliar this evening. So let's go ahead. Here we are. So everyone should see my presentation deck that says Streetwise Partners Information Session. Could I have a thumbs up if you can see that this evening?
Third time's a charm. You see it?
Wonderful. It's working. It's working here. We've tried very hard to make our virtual world work out. So glad that this is working. And let's go ahead and jump right into this evening in overview. So for those who are unfamiliar with us at Streetwise, Streetwise Partners was built on the principle of equity. As an organization, we know that talent is distributed equally across all people, but unfortunately, opportunity is not. So research actually shows that where you grow up, where you go to school, and whether your parents are college educated gives you 12 times the advantage in gaining access to opportunity and jobs. So as an organization, we began in 1997. And since 1997, we have worked with those who have not had the access to close the professional network gap and create these opportunities. So today you may wonder how we do this. And what we actually do is host a 13-week program where we connect our mentees with business professionals in a wide variety of fields and connect mentees often with a network of professionals who are in the industry that they would like to work in. So for example, one week we may focus on the elevator pitch or telling your own story. We may focus on writing an effective cover letter or revamping your resume, and much, much more, which I will get into in just a couple of slides. So our curriculum is very structured, and our staff helps to guide these discussions so that our mentees can grow professionally. Prior to the pandemic, we would meet as a cohort in some of the top conference rooms throughout the country, such as Morgan Stanley or Gallup, just to name a few. Today, we are completely virtual with our mentees and mentors meeting in a virtual space. So we can dive in now to talk a little bit about who we serve, which is really what Streetwise is all about, talking about our mentees and our population. So with that being said, let's dive into profile one. So profile one would be our most common mentee. 80% of our mentees fall into this category that you see here, which would be a mentee who is a student studying for an associate's or bachelor's degree at a local college such as Baruch or Bronx Community College, which are two of our community partners. Many times the mentees that fall into this category are the first in their family to attend college and oftentimes are first-generation Americans. They come to Streetwise because they are looking to gain a network. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for a role model. And people will sometimes ask, if these mentees are in college, shouldn't they have access to a guidance counselor or an advisor who can help them with the things you're talking about, the professional skills, the soft skills that are needed? And they do. However, as you can understand, that same advisor is serving thousands of other students. So they come to Streetwise for individualized support and attention. That would be the most common mentee. Profile 2 would be a mentee who is a skilled immigrant, English as second language. They are coming to Streetwise because they are oftentimes working in minimum wage jobs or survival jobs, and they usually have advanced degrees from their country that did not transfer when they came to the US. So they really need their mentor's help in navigating the US job market. Things such as resume writing or interviewing, as you and I may be very familiar with, looking someone in the eye when you're talking to them, or shaking a hand when we were in person. These are things that are not common knowledge to everyone. So the mentees in Profile 2 are really looking for help, again, in navigating the US job market. They come from some of our community partners, such as the English Speaking Union, for example, and many other ways, such as word of mouth, for example. The last profile I have here, last but not least, of course, are some of our mentees who are studying in local tech programs. They are studying at programs such as Empower or Perscolas, and they are obtaining the hard skills they need for their certifications. But just like Profile 1, they are coming to Streetwise to better their professional development skills, to obtain a role model for that guidance that everyone deserves. So very similar to Profile 1, though they are studying at a local tech program. And the last thing I'll say on this slide, which I promise you is one of my longest slides this evening, is that every mentee in our program, again, is really, really looking for a role model and wants to develop on their own professional skills. They are coming to a highly competitive program where we see upwards of 500 applications each cycle and can oftentimes only bring in about 60 mentees. So I promise you that they want to work on themselves. We as an organization are making sure that the mentees who are part of our program do not have access to the resources or networks available to them. And we are really helping those who are in need. And with that being said, we can jump in to talk a little bit about what we do and how you can mentor with us. So there are 2 phases to our 13-week mentorship program. Phase 1 would be your continuous support, 2 hours a week for 13 weeks. Each week we focus on a different topic at hand, and in just a couple of slides, I will show you a breakdown of the topics that we will focus on. Besides for the 2 hours that you're dedicating to our session, we do ask that you're communicating with your mentee for at least 30 minutes per week outside of session, whether that's on the phone or Zoom, to make sure the mentee is comfortable submitting their weekly assignments, as well as making sure the mentee is staying on top of the goals that you will set forth. That would be phase 1, joining us 2 hours a week for 13 weeks. And phase 2 would be your continuous support of your mentee for 9 months following the program's end. So that is going to look a little bit different depending on where your mentee is at the end of the session. If your mentee has landed an internship or a job, for example, you may need to check in once a month just to see how they're doing. If your mentee is a student, you may need to check in a little bit more often to see if they're landing some interviews, for example. And as a mentor, you do guide the mentees to do quite a few things. So this is just a little breakdown, and I will show you further next slide on what we do each session. So when you meet your mentee, you will identify the mentee's strengths as well as set goals for the next 13 weeks. We will focus heavily on resume writing and cover letter writing. We will focus on virtual interview skills as well as virtual networking. We all know in our new virtual world that these skills are more important than ever to connect with people in this virtual setting. We will focus on LinkedIn and building out your online presence. Many of our mentees come into the program without a LinkedIn profile or really understanding how the LinkedIn profile, how you can leverage for employment opportunities and networking, of course. So we focus heavily on that. And last but not least, public speaking. Every single mentee who applies for our program tells us that public speaking is their weakness and something they want to work on. That may be one of your weaknesses as well. We all know that it's one of the top fears in the world of public speaking. So we try to do different activities each and every week to focus on public speaking, building confidence in telling your story. And in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how we continue the public speaking skills. So with that, this is just a little breakdown of each and every session. And I promise you today, I'm not going to go into detail on each and every session here. There are just a couple things I want to point out. So one is just the structure of our 2 hours each and every week. So we fill those 2 hours with quite a few activities. First, we have a networking activity so that you are getting to know the entire cohort other than just your mentee or potentially your co-mentor. We try to do fun activities, of course. We then would jump into the guided discussion that we're focusing on that week, as you see here. And then we would send you to a specific breakout room for one-on-one or 2-to-1 work time, where we provide the workbooks. We provide you with everything you should be working on with your mentee. And the only other thing I want to cover here, there are actually 2 things. So I keep saying this is a 13-week program. However, as a mentor, you will join us for 11 of those 13 weeks. You would have off for the speed networking activity as well as mock interviews, because we do invite in new one-time volunteers for these events. And then, as I mentioned, presentations. So you as a volunteer, as a mentor, do not have a final presentation. However, this is the most important day for your mentee, session 13, where they will present on their streetwise journey or an industry deep dive. And I promise you that everyone in the room, whether it's what I'm talking about in an in-person session or a virtual session, we are all in tears seeing the growth of the mentees on this particular day. And with that, the time commitment in place. So I know I've continuously said that this is a 2-hour volunteerism that you would take part in once a week for 13 weeks. We will begin the week of April 6th for our spring cohort, running through June 30th. And you would choose to join us on Tuesday evenings or Wednesday evenings, whatever works best for your schedule. We meet from 6:30 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. And we will be bringing in 90 mentees for this particular cohort and upwards of 140 mentors. As I mentioned, we do like to bring in 2-to-1 when possible. So many people have the option to have a co-mentor if you're comfortable doing so. All right, and I just have a couple more slides here. This slide in particular is my absolute favorite that talks about our impact. So it may look a little bit bland to you, but I'll just quickly go through. So on average, we have an 85% graduation rate from our program. Oftentimes we do have mentees who have to step down for circumstances outside of the program. We sometimes ask mentees to step down if unfortunately they are not submitting their weekly assignments or if they are missing program. But on average, 85% of our mentees graduate. Mentors and mentees report 100+ contacts made as I continuously have mentioned, we have many opportunities for your own professional development as well as networking. And my favorite statistics here are that within 1 year of graduating from our program, we see that 70% of our mentees are fully employed with an annual income growth of 250%. And I like to point out that this is on average because we do have many mentees who land their absolute dream job while in our program or get their foot in the door to an internship that will then land them their dream job. I can tell you stories all day. My friend Simon here can tell you stories all day of many of his mentees who have very, very great success stories within our program. And we will be sharing in the chat our website so that you can, of course, view some of those success stories. And really quickly here, these are just some of our corporate partners, which may be part of your local community that work with us frequently. We see many of our volunteers and mentors who come from some of the businesses that you see here, as well as many others that are not listed. And last but not least, I just wanted to talk about some additional ways to get involved. So if you listen to my presentation today and feel as though you are not able to commit to the 2 hours a week, I understand that it can certainly be a large time commitment. However, you can join us for some of our one-time events. We have speed networking and mock interviews. Speed networking is actually taking place this evening for our winter cohort. So we host these events 4 times a year, quarterly, and you can certainly join us. You can host a day of doing for your team in particular, where we would bring in mentees for a specialized or customized event, such as answering the top interview questions, for example, and then of course, hiring our mentees or graduates. So I know I mentioned that our mentees are highly skilled, are part of a competitive process to be a part of this program. You can come to me with a job description, with an opening on your team, for example, and I can provide you with a resume or multiple resumes of fits for that position, for example. So at this time, I will stop sharing my screen. I know that in the chat, we are going to share my email. We are going to share the application to apply to mentor with Streetwise, as well as our website if you would like to view the videos that I mentioned today. And I thank you all for your time. I know this may not seem like it fits in, but I hope that I do see some applications after this evening.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Your organization seems fantastic. I'll just ask if any of the committee have any questions, further questions about the organization or about the program for Michelle while she's here. I'm not seeing any, but we will grab from the chat all the information and we can send it out to the committee. Oh, Simon has a question. Simon.
Not so much a question, but I just want to say thanks for Michelle for coming by. I thought it was really great because, you know, we are the community board. I have had mentees in the community of CB5 and other community boards. I just think it's great to get this message out to people who, so they know that, you know, we can pass along the information and get support for what is a great program.
Thank you, Simon. I think you're absolutely right. We will share the information that you provide to us, Michelle. So if anyone wants to sign up or if they can pass the information about the organization to any friends or family or people they know that might be interested, we can do that. Any other comments or anything from our panelists? I'm calling you panelists, members. Sorry about that. I was reading from the thing. I'm seeing none. So with that, I'm going to thank Michelle again. I'm going to thank Tristan and Rachel for the presentation tonight, Joe Mafia for arranging Independent Budget Office to come and speak to the members of the committee, and just thank everyone for being here tonight and their work. So I will see you all again at our next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Renee.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.